Well, thank you for coming. My name is Marc Kalan. This is my associate Nurit Winkler, and we're happy to have you here at this event. We come from the Center for Fertility and Gynecology in Tarzana, California, just about 20 miles north of here on the 101. And our center, a little bit about it, it was founded in 1987, which, although it doesn't sound like it's that long ago in the world of fertility and IVF, it is ancient. And to give some context to that, we'd like to remind you that the first baby in the history of the world born through IVF was born in 1978. First baby in the United States was born in 1981. First baby in the Western United States was born in 1982. So 5 short years after that, our clinic was founded. And so we really are proud of the fact of our ancestry and our legacy, that we have been around for a while, and we will be around for a long while longer. There's 3 doctors in our center, myself, Dr. Winkler, and Dr. Mike Vermish. And we're all board certified reproductive endocrinologists and obstetrician gynecologists. We all see our own patients. Nurses do not do ultrasounds, ultrasound technicians do not scan patients. We always see our patients, and there's always a doctor making every decision, and they're at every step of the way during your care. We like to fashion our clinic, think of it as a boutique style clinic. We do between 250 and 350 cycles per year, and that number is very comfortable for us in that we are robust and we thrive, but our patients never feel like a number. It's not a factory. No detail gets just sort of lost in the shuffle. No patient's name is forgotten because there were 70 other patients that day that were seen. We have our own lab that we use exclusively. Nobody else uses our lab, which we think is a very important thing. That means that we don't ever have to wait to start something. We have our lab at our beck and call, which when you're working with biological systems is a huge advantage. It gives us a great amount of flexibility. We do not batch any of our cycles, meaning there are some centers which, if they need to, for logistical reasons, start at certain times, they will use birth control pills to manipulate cycles and start at very specific times. With us, we will start based on our patients' needs, not on our laboratory's needs. And lastly, success rates. We are very proud of our success rates. If you were to look on the Society for Assisted Reproductive Technologies, the SART website, we consistently, year after year, rank amongst the highest in the entire country as far as our success rates in all forms of fertility treatment, but specifically with egg donation and surrogacy. I'll hand this over to Dr. Winkler for a little bit.
I'll be talking a little bit about our practice, and the cycle of egg donation and surrogacy is definitely one of the most successful and rewarding cycles. The success rate is very high, and definitely one of the cycles that we enjoy doing the most. On the other hand, it's one of the most stressful cycles, and the reason why it's so stressful, because other than most fertility treatment are stressful because there's so many people involved. There's like an egg donor, there is a surrogate, all people that you're totally depending on, but you have really no control over, and that makes this process very stressful. And I think that's the central role of the fertility specialist, is to really be at the center of that and make sure that things are working well for you. We have to watch for you, so we are the one that have to make sure that the egg donor is doing her part and the surrogate. And when I think about the responsibility of the fertility specialist in this process, I divide it in 2 parts. Number 1 is the medical one and scientific, and that have to do with providing the service and the success rate. And the second one have to do really with making this process as easy as possible for you. And the way we make the process easy, can change, is number 1, communication. I mean, when I go to a physician, one of the first things I want to know, number 1, that he cares about me and I'm not a number. And the second, that I can communicate freely. And communication might not be an issue when everything goes smoothly, but it's extremely important when things don't go well. I think in our practice, we really make a huge effort of communicating a lot with our patients. And that's done through emails, phone calls, Skype. We make sure to answer personally the phone calls, and making sure that you know that we are always there, and when you call, we'll answer your questions. The second one is being available. And the way our practice works, although there are 3 physicians, we really try to be the one physician per patient, and I think it's very important. I want to take full responsibility on the cycle and the treatment that I'm doing. I want to make sure that I'm helping choosing the donor, the surrogate, and take full responsibility. So when a patient comes to our practice, he's not going to see a lot of physicians and nurses. He's going to be seeing me, and I'll make sure to make the majority of the scans are the most important part of the cycle. So you know there is one person there that is for you. The third one is really to make sure that we accommodate your time and your schedule and your desire. And that goes with the fact that we really build the cycles based on your wishes and your time. And a patient can come and say that he wants the egg retrieval and embryo transfer to fall in, the second week of August, and he wants delivery to be somewhere in August, and so on. And we really work hard to make sure to answer all those demands and kind of respect your wishes. The second part of our responsibility, as I mentioned before, is to make sure that the medical part is done correctly, and that's very critical for the success of the cycle. And I'll have Dr. Kalan explain a little bit about this part, and I'll talk a little bit more about choosing a surrogate.
So, when preparing for this talk, I try to put myself into my patient's shoes and think about what it would be like to encounter this daunting process. And so this is kind of a list of the milestones that the patients can expect to encounter as they're kind of going along this journey. And it kind of starts off, and they're not necessarily in chronological order, because it's kind of a little bit different for everybody who goes through this. But a lot of the steps that they'll encounter is an initial consult with a physician. Following that, they'll choose a donor and a surrogate. And then once that is done, they'll get medical clearance for both of those parties. Once that is done, then there's legal clearance for both those parties. And then once that is done, the doctors will then create a schedule on when stimulation starts and all the things. Once the schedule is done, that's the next step when the stimulation will begin. And the stimulation will involve monitoring and medication and the such. Once that is completed, the retrieval is done. That's when the eggs are removed. Once the retrieval is done, the eggs are fertilized, and this is where gender selection or biopsies of the embryos can occur if that's something that somebody desires to do. Following that is when the embryos are transferred, and then there's the first 11 weeks of life of which the fertility specialist follows. So we'll talk a little bit about choosing a donor and choosing a surrogate. There's no right or wrong way to choose a donor. It's going to depend specifically on everybody's individual and unique priorities. So I kind of think about things like, do you want somebody who went to Harvard, or do you want someone who was a homemaker? Meaning, is it somebody who you're interested in academics, or do you want them to have a history of fertility? You may have to choose between those things. They may not be mutually exclusive, but it's a good idea to kind of keep those things in mind. Do you want somebody who has certain looks, auburn hair and green-blue eyes? Or do you want someone who's logistically available, someone that's close to the clinic that you know is going to be available for every appointment? It's not going to be a hassle to get the appointments. Maybe you want someone that doesn't have allergies, they don't have nut allergies, or maybe you want someone with a certain ancestry that's descended from Christopher Columbus. Who knows? The point is that there's a lot of different priorities which you can choose, and choosing those priorities, having some idea with them, will make this process easier in choosing a donor. The other way of going about this is to kind of use the context of your life and other big decisions you've made or other big relationships that you have. How did you go about making those relationships? So you might be able to think about how you encountered the love of your life or your current partner. Did you meet that person because you were walking down the street and something about them caught your eye? If that's kind of how you operate, maybe you want to just peruse donor websites and look through some profiles and see if any of them kind of catch your eye. Maybe your partner came to you, you were set up by a trusted friend. If that's kind of how you work, maybe you want to find an agency or a doctor and let them kind of guide you through it and make some recommendations. Or maybe your partner was someone that you were friends with at some point and it evolved into something more. And in that context, maybe there's somebody in your life right now who you know who could be your donor. Maybe your sister's best friend's babysitter would be a perfect egg donor. There's different ways of approaching that person for that, but there's a lot of ways of choosing a donor. There's no one right or wrong way. And Dr. Winkler can tell you a little bit about how to choose a surrogate.
And when we talk about this cycle being one of the most rewarding and successful one, I think that one of the most critical part is actually choosing the surrogate. And when you hear those horror stories about surrogate cycles that went wrong, that the surrogate disappeared, didn't follow the contract and so on, I bet that 99% of the time there was some red flags at the beginning that could have been avoided if there was like a thorough screening. And I think, we'll walk through a couple of things, and I think the first one, when choosing a surrogate, I rather review with my patients 10, 20 profiles and help them making this choice as opposed to just choosing based on profiles. And I'll give you an example. If a surrogate writes in her profiles that she will not terminate the pregnancy for herself, she's against abortion, but in case when she's a surrogate it will be needed, she will terminate. You already know that this surrogate probably will not terminate, and if she'll have to do it, it's going to be against her moral. So that's going to be a problem right there. And those are those red flags or things on the profile that we can detect from the beginning. I said, you know what? If you are planning to terminate the pregnancy, if the baby, something is wrong, she might not be a good fit. Once we choose a profile together with a surrogate, the second is really the interview that you're going to have with the surrogate. And the interview is either done personally or done via Skype. And I always say, trust your gut feeling. That goes in life in general, but that goes definitely with a surrogate. If you did a Skype consult or you met her and it doesn't feel right, let it go. And that's true even when the surrogate, sometimes the surrogate looks great. I mean, she's done 2 cycles before successful, she's highly recommended, everything looks right, and you try to convince yourself still, why doesn't it feel right? If it doesn't feel right to you, just let it go. I think that the gut feeling in this process, it's very important that the connection that you make with the surrogate is very critical for how this process will continue. But after you've done the Skype consult, that would be my screening, and my screening goes beyond the medical one, the medical of trying to make sure that she doesn't have sexually transmitted disease and all of that. It really try to understand her personality better, and I spend a lot of time, and sometimes during those interviews, things doesn't look right to me. I mean, she could have omit a small information about her past, like she did terminations or 1 or 2 and it's not mentioned. And those things kind of create mistrust, and I'll share it with you. So I think there is a screening on your part, there is a screening on my part, and the whole purpose is really to make sure that when we start the process and we transfer the embryos, we are very comfortable with the surrogate. After the surrogate is clear by myself or the fertility specialist that you work with, then you go into the legal contract and so on. And even then, there is about 3 weeks on average before we'll be transferring the embryos. Sometimes more. And those 3 weeks are very important because if there are any problems that we did not detect before, like they'll come up. The surrogate suddenly doesn't follow their first appointments or seems very concerned about some aspect of it. So the bottom line is that there could be red flags, but it's very important to recognize them ahead of time and to be able to stop this process or not start it. And by really being very thorough on both our parts, yourself and myself, or the fertility specialist that you work with, try to do our best to have a very smooth journey. And I think that at the end, the majority of those cycles of egg donation surrogacy are beautiful and very rewarding, and it's a great experience. But again, we really have to make sure that we start them right. Thank you so much for being here. Let me know if there are opening to questions.